it's truly my honor to welcome her here. And after she speaks to us, I would love for you to come and look at the table where we have some books. And if you'd like to make a donation for her organization, Navadanya, which is protecting our seeds, that would be wonderful. So I'd like to introduce Vandana Shiva.
Thank you, my namesake Shiva. And thank you to Joanna too. Not just for having us here, but for creating this beautiful space. And to all of you for being here. So I know everyone, I think, is concerned about the whole GM question. Of course, the word GMO itself is funny because it doesn't communicate what it is. It should be genetically engineered organism. But the word modified was added so that it could be said that you are genetically modified version of your parents because you're not identical to them. And it became a way to talk about this being just like nature reproduces and exactly the same. I woke up to the GM question in really two steps. The first was when I was forced to look at what was happening in agriculture and this thing called the Green Revolution, which is not green and not revolutionary. It's just the introduction of chemicals into third world farming and push the kind of agriculture that is destroying the planet, is destroying the health of people. I mean, we now have from Punjab, where the chemical agriculture was implemented in the 60s, there's a train that leaves. It's called the cancer train. The train's name is called the cancer train. There's so many victims now. My analysis shows 75% biodiversity, 75% water, 75% soil degradation, and 40% climate instability comes from industrial farming. And the latest in that is changing the seed, tweaking the seed by putting a toxic gene into it to claim invention and to claim it's being made for the first time. And one way you can remember this is GMO could mean God move over. Get off. I'm the creator now. Because a patent means creating something new, an invention. So the second step in which I was woken up to this was I was invited to a meeting of the biotechnology industry, 1987. And they talked about how they had to do genetic engineering. I said, but why? I mean, the Green Revolution failed, it hasn't delivered. Why do you want to do genetic engineering? It's the only way we can claim patents. And patents are the only way we can collect royalties. I said, but you know, seeds have evolved as the commons over millennia. How can you say it's yours? It's the only way we can grow. Otherwise we'll die. It's like the cancer cell, you know. Either cancer grows or if it's in regression it goes. And they said they were too small. These were the big companies of that time. They said we were too small. We'll only be 5 companies controlling food and health. And to get there we have to make sure there's an international treaty. And they put intellectual property rights into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. And later, that in 1995, a Monsanto representative said, we defined this. We were the patient, diagnostician, physician all in one. We defined a problem, and the problem they defined was farmers' safe seeds. But that's not a problem, that's a duty. Saving seeds is a duty. So 87, when I heard the industry talk about how they had to do genetic engineering, and there was another thing they said, because they had tried one experiment of a GMO for controlling river blindness, and they'd released this organism into the Congo. And I said, what test did you do? They said, we can't afford to do the tests. If we stop to do the tests, we lose the market. So destroying safety of people's health and destroying safety of the environment was built right into this rush. But you can see how inconsistent it is. Because when it comes to saying I made something new by adding a toxic gene and taking a patent, they said this is totally new, never existed before. And then you say, but I want labeling for this. I want you to do the tests about what this new thing is. They said, just like nature made it. Substantially equivalent. And I remember 1992, we managed to get the Convention on Biological Diversity into place in Rio. Senior President Bush walked out because I'd managed to put an article for biosafety. Biosafety is the language we use for safety in the context of GMOs. And it's now international law. And Article 19.3 was put into the convention. And the minute the countries voted this in, President Bush walked out and said, I won't let my at that time it was 50 billion, I won't let my $50 billion industry go down the drain. Showing very clearly that the industry could only survive if there was no safety. Now you never do that. I mean, would you allow automobiles on the roads if there were no automobile safety regulations? Would we allow chemicals to be introduced without toxicology tests? And yet, we've allowed GMOs on the premise not only that we will not look for safety, we will pass new laws that say don't look. So the US law actually is don't look, don't see. From day one. And you had a vice president at that time who, I always laugh about this, I say he couldn't spell potato, but he could spell substantial equivalence. You know? Now, of course, because Monsanto is a US company, and Monsanto, you know, its history is chemical warfare. Agent Orange, Dioxin. Very good film made by a French documentary filmmaker called The World According to Monsanto. And there's also a book where she traces the very beginnings. But of course the word Monsanto means sacred mountain. There's a village in Portugal, I've seen a village in Italy, Monsanto, means the sacred mountain. Because I think the wife of the founder came from one of those places. And so here's this company which is anything but sacred, that has a name called Monsanto. So as a war industry, they were very good at destroying independence of government. And I was told that the only files missing were the Agent Orange files. You know, when people asked for the right to information, they'd gone. So a company that has pushed chemicals for warfare is so used to pushing chemicals and toxics for warfare through our food system. And as you know, the whole intellectual property patenting issue, Monsanto said, we wrote this law, we took it to the US government, and the US government imposed it on the world. Partly because of the way the economies have changed through globalization, there's only one area in which US is collecting money and has a positive trade balance. That's agribusiness and patenting. But sadly, it doesn't benefit the US people. It's benefiting the US corporation. And there is this assumption, remember what's good for General Motors is good for America? Well, it's that kind of thesis, what's good for Monsanto is good for America. And right now, the situation is so serious that the entire US foreign policy is linked only to pushing GMOs. Only pushing GMOs. So anytime there's an independent government and a whole attack comes. If you look at the WikiLeaks, because France has been very, very anti-GM, they have a whole movement called the Reapers. I just got a letter from them yesterday again. What they go out is just reap the GM trials. And they have volunteers. You know, if 2 get arrested, then 5 more come. 5 get arrested, 20 more come. And the courts had to rule in their favor, as the courts had to rule in the favor of an early women's movement in England. It was called the genetic snowball. women went in and destroyed the trials. And when they were arrested, 5 more women went in. And then eventually the courts ruled and said they're doing this in self-defense. They're doing it to protect themselves. There are 3 major issues with the GMO question. Because even though, Monsanto presents it as a technology. The language they use is a technology. No technology hangs in the air. It works with things nature gives us. So it is, at the end of it, a GMO is a seed. It's a contaminated seed, but it's a seed. And I'm fighting a case in India right now, supporting a government of Andhra Pradesh, where the government said you've taken the prices too high. And Monsanto said, but this is not a seed. It's a technology. So we are arguing this actually literally in the courts. It's a bit like, you remember the Shylock thing of the pound of flesh, and then Portia had to say, okay, take the pound, but don't shed the blood. Have your technology, but don't sell a seed. Second, because seed gives us food, it is food. And that's the languages they want us to not get. In this language of technological transformation and the next step and the next leap in agriculture. And that's why the Green Revolution narrative is so important for them. But the narrative itself is false, because even though we're repeatedly told it's industrialization of farming that has fed the world and increased food production, the reality is today, 2013, 80% food eaten in the world comes from small farms. Only 20% comes from large farms. And most of the GM corn and soya is not food in any case. It's biofuel, it's animal feed. All this feeding the world is just so disconnected with the reality of what's actually going on. So the whole issue of control over the seed is really the issue. And collecting royalties is the thing. And I'd said this in the beginning, and now it's coming to be. I used to say, we must watch the GMOs, but we must watch them as a means of control. And now Monsanto has started taking patents on non-GM seeds. Big issues going on in the US, in Europe right now. Broccoli, tomato, all kinds of conventional. Because at the end of the day, if they have all the seeds under their control, they won't have to do genetic engineering. But by then they'll have destroyed so much, which is why we can't afford to allow them to bully us to push this. So a very important part of this is democracy. Because if Californians want a label, it is subversion of democracy to use money to undo what the people had moved on. And to mislead those who didn't know what a GMO is, to just say $400 more. But I often say Monsanto causes genetic pollution. It causes knowledge pollution because it destroys our heads in terms of how we think about the world. And it causes the pollution of democracy. It's totally contaminating democracy. And all of these things have to be addressed. Different people will address different parts of it because every one of us has a different passion. But all of it needs to be addressed. Now, in terms of the genetic contamination, the contamination is inevitable because they're genetically modifying crops and plants will pollinate. And pollen will carry from a GM field to a non-GM field to an organic field. And this is what happened with the very famous case in Canada where Percy Smizer, a Canadian farmer, his field was contaminated and then Monsanto sued him. And he fought back. And it was a very famous case where I said, normally polluters should pay. If I have contaminated, if I've thrown rubbish into your backyard, there'll be some kind of a law to correct that. genetic pollution is a pollution. And it should be subjected to the polluter pays. And in fact, in that UN treaty, there are discussions on liability going on. So at that level, things are moving. But on the ground level, Monsanto is using pollution to own the farmer's field. And Percy has told me that in the corridor, the lawyers of Monsanto said, if contamination is the way we're going to control the food supply, we are going to contaminate. They love to control. And they sent out detectives. I mean, they had hired something called Pinkerton detectives. But on all the farms in the US, these detectives go around collecting samples, collecting pollen. And then they do the DNA analysis to see if the Roundup Ready trait is there. And what are the two traits on the basis of which they own to become creators of seed and creators of life? Only two toxic traits. In the 80s, when I used to debate these companies, they used to say, oh, there'll never be hunger. We'll grow food on the moon. We will grow food in the Sahara. We will grow food on toxic dumps because we'll be able to engineer everything. In these 20 years, we have only two applications. Genetically engineered soya with Roundup Ready traits and corn with Roundup Ready traits. One gene that expresses itself in the plant in order for Roundup to be sprayed in higher quantity to not kill that plant but to kill everything else. So Monsanto gets to sell more Roundup and of course gets to sell the seed. Do look for two videos. I'm sure they're up on YouTube. I'm sure you can track them on Argentina and what's happened with Roundup Ready soya. It's a green desert. They spray Roundup from the air. If I have a kitchen garden, it's finished because Roundup kills everything green. They say that in their brochures. It kills everything. It kills everything green that it comes in contact with. And when I was debating Monsanto representatives in the convention, and we would talk about how dangerous this was, this person said, it's a smart technology that prevents the weeds from stealing the sunshine. As if biodiversity is stealing the sunshine, and as if the sun wasn't meant to shine on all of us and on all plants. So the two films, one is called Killing Fields, and one has just been sent to me. It's called Bad Seed. It's been made by Al Jazeera. Children are being born with birth defects. And of course, everyone's being terrorized. Because if one farmer says, you will not grow this near my farm, they're killed, they disappear, there's attacks, there's mafia. This technology cannot expand without the ultimate violence going with it. I have been taken by the minister who had to resign on this issue in Brazil, and she flew me over the Amazon, where the Amazon was being chopped for Roundup Ready soya. And all illegal. Anyone would stand, they'd kill them. Sister Dorothy, you might remember, a Catholic nun was killed. But the second trait is the Bt toxin trait. It's called Bt, yeah? Bt corn, Bt cotton. And in this, they take a soil organism called Bacillus thuringiensis, pull out the gene that produces a toxin, introduce it into the plant, but in the organism in the soil, it's not a ready-made toxin, it's an endotoxin. It has to go through the gut of the insect to become a toxin. So it kills the caterpillar family, but nothing else. It doesn't harm mammals, it doesn't harm humans. But now in the plant, it's a ready-made toxin, and it's a high-dose toxin. And it is killing other life. There's the study of Cornell on the monarch butterfly, and you know, Monsanto's very clever. The minute a study gets published, they go after the journal. And they've worked out something called viral marketing. I don't know if you've heard of it. You know, someone sits on a computer, pretends to be 1,000 different scientists, and bombards the journal, saying, withdraw that article's wrong. And journals aren't used to this because, scientists are closed groups of people. They don't like to be in the public eye. And they panic. And this viral marketing has been used against any independent publication, which has gone through the peer review and gone through everything. It's being used against Seralini, the French scientist now, who showed mammalian, in the rats, he showed very high levels of tumors. It's been used against Irina Ernekova, Russian Academy of Science. They destroyed Arpad Putsai, the very good film made by a German filmmaker. Actually, he's made 2 good films on this subject. One is called Life Running Out of Control. It was the first really good film on genetic engineering. And the second he made more recently is a film called Scientists Under Attack. What happens to every independent scientist who... Now, one would imagine that if society had had a say, we would not have voted for toxic genes in our food. Because it's doing nothing. It's not increasing food production. It's only increasing toxic production. And it's not doing a job that it's supposed to do. The toxic was supposed to control pests in the case of BT and control weeds in the case of Roundup resistance. But both have created super pests and super weeds. So now there's 13 times more spraying of pesticides in the BT cotton fields in India. And in the US, there's a doubling of herbicide use. In Argentina, it's a 10-fold increase. The graph of chemical use is shooting up. So technology that was supposed to control pests and weeds has actually failed. It doesn't do the job. And it definitely doesn't increase food production. So 2 years ago, there's one man in Cornell. He doesn't sit in Cornell, but just like when you were having the Proposition 37 discussion, there was a fellow called
Henry
Miller, who pretended to be from Stanford and had to be, the answer to be removed. This other guy called Clive James pretends to be from Cornell. And he runs something called ISAAA, International Society for the Acquisition of Agricultural Biotechnology Applications. Can you imagine? They've got to use such convoluted language. It couldn't be doing much good. Anyway, his graphs of everything shoot up. More production, more expansion, just to panic. There's been a South African critique. They exaggerated the GMO acreage 5-fold to make it look like it's just spreading. And so people just say, inevitable, let's all stop. So 2 years ago, we said, why should only Monsanto and its men give us the reports of what's happening with GMOs? We should write our own reports. So we did a global report, and this is just a summary, but the full report is available on the Navdanya website. And after we'd finished, we holding our heads and saying it doesn't produce more food, doesn't reduce chemicals, doesn't control pests and weed. How do we title this? So we called it The GMO Emperor Has No Clothes. Yeah? And like I said, this is just the summary. The fat one is available to download. So it's got, in every situation, the people of that country have written. Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, Canada, US, South Africa, India. Now the story of India begins in 1898 when I saw ads in the newspapers from Monsanto saying Indian farmers are going to be having this miracle seed called Bolgard next year. Now I'd known about the way Bolgard had performed in this country, and Monsanto had to settle because it had done so badly. They call it Bolgard because it's supposed to guard against the bollworm with this Bt toxin. So I rang up our environment ministry. I said, did they come to you for approval? Because they're supposed to. No. We don't even know what this thing is. I rang up agriculture ministry because seeds should be approved by the agriculture ministry. They said no. So I collected a little more data and sued in the Supreme Court of India. And they weren't allowed to commercialize for 4 years. But the globalization laws of free trade allowed them to start buying up Indian companies and pushing the non-GM seeds to take control. And there are 5 things that changed. with Monsanto's entry. First, our government started to get corrupted. Second, the diversity of crops we grow became monocultures of cotton. Third, it was now a property, intellectual property, and the seed cost jumped 8,000%, largely for the royalty. On our assessment, 1,000 crores, which is about $200 million, comes out of the poor peasants of India for cotton royalties to St. Louis, Missouri every year. The Brazilian farmers have sued Monsanto $2.2 billion for soybean royalty collection. And this issue is just exploding now, because now it's really starting to show the results. And the alternatives are destroyed. Monsanto just doesn't come in and say, okay, you like a brown t-shirt, so there's the brown, and here's a pink t-shirt, you also have the pink. No. They have to destroy all alternatives. And the way they do it is first making sure farmers have no other supply, their own included. And the language they use for this, and they try and make it look scientific again, is called seed replacement. And I say, seeds are not like dirty socks or socks with holes in them that need to be replaced. Seeds are life. You don't replace life. Life is not replaceable. And seeds are perennial. Thousands of years we've had seed, and no seed is static. Seeds evolve, they adapt. You give them love, you give them care, the same seed will give you more. You neglect a child, the child will become a dwarf. The child doesn't get enough food, you get dwarfism. Get more food, they grow better. But more than that, they adapt all the time. So no seed is a static seed. They convince the farmers your seed is primitive. And the language that has evolved in this area is amazing. Local seeds are primitive. They are land races. They're as if they popped out of the land and the farmer didn't use their brain. Primitive cultivars, land races, inferior seeds. And give it up, take this new superior seed. And farmers believe in the ads because the first round of ads were all from religion. Mahabharata and Ramayana. And farmers believe all the epics, So they said, if Ram is telling us to buy it, maybe it's good. If Hanumanji, the monkey god is coming to say, this will deliver you, must be good. And they chose different gods in different regions because India is such a pluralistic society. And in India, everything is divine. So for everything, there's a god. We have 300 million divinities. And in the north, there's Sikhism, so they used Guru Nanak. According to what was the faith they used. And in the early stages, that's how people gave up. I said, okay, my seed is. And more, and I'd say, why did you give it up? I said, but I always assumed my neighbor would have it. I thought only I was giving up. They don't realize Monsanto works through a blitzkrieg. 30 districts at one go. Armies of 2,000 salesmen enter the villages. And before you know it, no other seed. No seed. Government, which has been breeding, withdraws because of that same influence. Same has happened here. There's no public breeding anymore. Farmers can't turn to a university to get good seed. The third source is other people supplying seed. Small seed companies, seed savers. So Monsanto's gone after every independent seed company, suing them on intellectual property. Seed cleaners, elevators, the recent case of Bauman, this farmer who bought seed from an elevator and planted out that grain. And Monsanto's saying, even that's ours. 4, 5, 6, 7 generations after the first seed was sold. That case is going to be a very important case in this country. So in India, with the cotton, with the high costs, the high chemical use, unreliability. This particular year we've had a very bad drought in central India, which is the cotton area. And because of the drought, there's been a 40% failure of the BT cotton. This will never ever come in the newspapers. But this is government data, 40% failure. Now within this, the farmer gets absolutely squeezed and give up. Because they took the seed on credit. They signed on their land papers. And it's the day we've been doing a study called Seeds of Suicide from 1908 when the suicide started, when Monsanto entered. And the graph continues, it's now 270,000. And in this area, which is the heart of cotton, it's 3,000 per year. And Mika, who's a filmmaker from San Francisco, came and spent time and made a film called Bitter Seeds, which tries and communicates the tragedy. But 270,000, I mean, ethnic conflicts, 500 die, 600 are massacred, and the entire UN gets up. This is a genocide of a very large scale. But no one dares to stand up against Monsanto. And the last few weeks, Monsanto's blog is all against me about linking suicides to the Monsanto monopoly. So I've just done a new piece for I do a column every month for a major paper in India. And I'll make sure, Shiva, I will email it to you the minute it's published, because they don't publish it if it's circulating. So the minute it's published, I'll send it to you on the links, and I've kind of worked through it. Because the real issue is this, and it's all related to the way we think about the world. The entire genetic engineering is based on an obsolete idea of the world being a machine. Yeah? And genes being billiard balls. And as an aside, the very discipline of identifying genes had huge money behind it to keep eugenics alive post. There's a very good history of science by Lily Kay called The Molecular Vision of Life, how molecular biology was born to replace an ecological understanding of the world. Very mechanistic. Now, genes by themselves don't do anything. They have to act in concert with so much else. And in fact, the whole genetic engineering is recombinant DNA, the messaging happens through the RNA. It's very complex. What they call junk DNA is now being found to be the most active part of regulating living systems. So they define life as made of billiard balls, and it's like a Lego set. I can take a blue piece of a Lego and put it here, and a red piece and put it there, and nothing will happen. Things happen. Things happen. Because everything's related. And in fact, because this is not a Lego set, the very act of genetic engineering is so burdened with very hazardous tools. There are only two ways you can shoot a gene, either using a gene gun or infecting with a plant cancer. Either biological warfare or genetic warfare. But still the plant won't absorb it. And it's a blind, you're just shooting, you don't know if it's getting absorbed. So you add an antibiotic resistance marker. And you pour antibiotics onto the petri dish to separate the cells that absorb the gene from those that didn't. So every GM food has antibiotic resistance genes in it. There's enough research now that shows that DNA from the food we eat interacts with the DNA in the viruses and bacteria in our gut. And they create superviruses and superbacteria. In fact, a Chinese scientist wrote to me at the time of SARS to say, I think is the viruses they've used in the Roundup Ready soya that's now being used as animal feed in China that created this, and then it jumped from the animals to the humans. And it's totally plausible scientifically, totally plausible these things happen. But it doesn't stop there. There's a tendency for rejection, for what's called silencing, for not expressing. So they add a supervirus as a promoter. to make the gene express itself. So you've got bundles of bacteria and viruses, and those bundles aren't being assessed. In the US, they don't look at anything. There's no independent testing in this country. The company says we've looked and it's fine. And Michael Taylor, who was involved in the regulatory process, I think the FDA at that time, when the first product, the RBGH, remember the injection for the cows? And it was clear from the results that this is causing problems. He overrode it and said it's fine, it's safe. He's now heading USDA. Michael Taylor. I mean, you look at your Supreme Court judges, they're Monsanto judges. You look at your administrators, they came out of Monsanto. And Obama's administration is as packed, if not more, with Monsanto men. There are 80 lobbyists sitting in Europe, in Brussels. The countries say we don't want GMOs. European Commission says you have to have GMOs. And this fight goes on. It's been going on forever. The US sued Europe. I launched a huge global citizens campaign to say we're watching you. 30 million signatures we gave to the WTO to say, if you dare rule against European citizens, we will show the world that you are basically making decisions for corporate welfare, not for people's welfare. And the WTO didn't give a strict ruling. It gave a very funny, neither this way nor that. It was inconsequential. So this bundle, the European Food Safety Authority has just found a very large DNA of a virus in GMOs. And the scientific research shows that this very long DNA is what makes is the explanation for more tumors and cancers in the rat studies. And that's the kind of independent work we need much, much more. But it's very costly. You and I can't do that work in our backyard. What we can do is reclaim democracy. And there are two places where the reclaiming of democracy is absolutely central in this seed question. Seed and food. Because seed is the first link in the food. They're not separate things. Seed becomes food. At the level of the farm and the farmer, the issue is to have alternatives. And that is why we've launched this big campaign on seed freedom, and the big report we've done, again written globally across the world, what's happening to seed. It's available on the Navdanya website. And Navdanya spelled Navdanya. This means no patenting on seed, because you put a toxic gene into a plant and you say, I've created this plant and all future generations. You can't. So we've got to challenge the patenting of seed. We've got to stop the new laws that are making it illegal for people to have their own seed, which are the kind of laws being proposed. At the level of the right to food, the GMO labeling question is vital, because if you don't know what you're eating and you can't choose what you're eating, what kind of democracy are we living in? So these two ends of the food democracy equation have to be built up and strengthened, the links made, because these issues can't be dealt with separately anymore. They have to be linked. And as I said, being linked doesn't mean we all try to do all of it all the time, every day. No. It means we are aware of the linkages and we choose the piece that works best in our context, that works best for the kind of person you are and where you're located. So we can talk some more about that.
Should we open up?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was saying.
You guys, for Q&A.
Hi. My question is, friends of Navdanya and Navdanya, what can the people who are sitting here, maybe, I think a lot of us know who you are, and some of us it's a new experience to hear you speak about these things, but what can we do? What are the 3 top things that we could do to help?
To help Navdanya?
Yes.
So one sentence, what's Navdanya? When I heard about all of this, 87, I started Navdanya, which means 9 seeds. It also means the new gift. And we do 3 things. we first and foremost just save the seeds to ensure there are free seeds available. And we work with farmers to fight any law that would make it impossible for them to have their own seeds. And we've succeeded. Every time the government has tried to introduce laws to criminalize native seed, we've done a satyagraha. Satyagraha is Gandhi's word for non-cooperation. It means the fight for truth. And we feel the fight for truth of the seed is to allow seed to reproduce freely and to be shared freely. Second, because local seeds are wonderful with ecological farming. There's nothing wrong with them. They didn't fit with chemical farming, that's all. But they're wonderful for ecological biodiverse farming. And we've just done a study actually calculating on farm with local seeds, how much does biodiversity produce? We can produce food for 2 Indias through local seeds and through ecological farming. So we train farmers, and we started a school on the farm in Dehradun where we offer courses, and this constant stream of farmers and interns. And every year now we are offering a course for 1 month. It's called the A to Z of organic farming. Most organic farming trainings don't have the seed issue, and we have a whole week on the seed. The farm itself, we grow more than 1,500 varieties of crops, 650 varieties of rice, 150 varieties of wheat, and anything that wants to grow. And what's beautiful is plants I haven't seen since I was a child are now growing, and the butterflies and bees are coming back. And it's really like a sanctuary. And the third thing we do for the farmers is help them with fair trade. In the case of cotton, we've built up the Fibers of Freedom, small amounts of organic cotton, but we encourage farmers to not be dependent on cotton alone, but to grow food, because food is what they need first. So we've created seed banks there. And the seed banks, 110 of them have been set up. I want to cover the entire country, the entire world with these commons of the seeds. So how can people help? People can help by contributing to allow us to do this work.
Which they can do right over here on that table. If any of you would like to contribute, we're all set up.
And you can also come visit. But more importantly, the third is to really strengthen this movement for food freedom and food democracy.
So,
Shiva, are you calling the
Yes,
name?
but you had another
oh, I just wanted to say, so what's the best way? People go to the Navdanya website, or they go right over to that table, sign up, like, give us an action thing.
Well, the point is, if you want to donate and you want to have it in your tax thing, then Friends of Navdanya is where you should, because Friends of Navdanya was started by Kumkum here, so that people in the US can give and get the tax benefit that you get. Because if you send it to India, you won't get a tax benefit. But if you don't want a tax benefit, you can also send it to India.
There was another question.
Yes, with the situation in Mexico, how do you see, like, just to protect the corn from the contaminations of GMO and the other thing that, have you been able to revoke a patent? I think I saw it in a documentary, and I think that's fascinating, and I wish that's be the way that we protect the corn, natives corn, and for it to be available as it's
Yeah. So we call that reclaiming the biological commons. The first was the neem. I fought that case 11 years. Then was the basmati. That was patented by a Texas company. And then Monsanto patented an old Indian wheat which has low gluten because everyone's getting gluten allergies. And they thought they'd make huge money. We fought that one too. So we won all these cases. Some we took 11 years. In the case of Monsanto, they ran away. They dropped their patent and ran. And I think we need to be very creative, because if we pull the rug out from under them on the patent issue, and that's why we do the seed satyagraha. We say we don't recognize your patents. We don't recognize your patents. We're not going to give you royalty, like Gandhi did for the salt, where the British said only we'll make salt. And Gandhi walked to the beach, picked up the salt, and said, no, nature gives it for free. We need it for our survival. We will continue to make salt. And I say, we are in the civil rights moment on the food issue. Now, the civil rights movement used those same traditions of saying, you want to say I can't sit on the seat, and Rosa Parks said I'll sit. Yeah? So, if once we blow the lid on patenting, the GMOs will drop and they will run. On the Mexican issue, it's very serious, and I'm going for solidarity to them. They're doing a big public tribunal on the corn question.
So we're talking about India, but it's really about the globe. And by contributing to Nordania, we can help the cause in India, which is the world. But how do we address the issues in the States?
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, Navdania's in India, but the problem is a global problem. And that's one reason we've started these global campaigns. The GMO report is a global report. The new Seed Freedom campaign, which is a global campaign. And the Seed Freedom campaign is not only about the seed, it's about creating GMO-free food systems. And as I said, the report is available on our website, but more importantly, we're asking people to create gardens everywhere. Start growing your food, start saving your seeds. And we're calling it Seeds of Freedom, Gardens of Hope. That no garden should grow anything but an open pollinated seed. Otherwise, it's not a garden. You can't be buying hybrid seed and GM seed and saying this is a garden. Yeah? But also, through that, reclaim food sovereignty. Overcome this sense of powerlessness, that I don't know what I'm eating. And I think the Seeds of Freedom, Gardens of Hope is probably the most positive answer to Monsanto. To say in any case the world is being fed 80% by small farms and gardens, and if 80% is what is providing for food, can you imagine? All we have to do is 20% more.
Interesting, because I was so devastated, having been a big Obama supporter, to see the amount of Monsanto people that are just proliferating in the administration. But when I saw the focus on the garden, the kitchen garden at the White House, that was the one thing that made me think, well, maybe in their heart, if that's the messaging, you can do it yourself. So that was the only positive thing I could take from that very disappointing revelation.
Yeah.
With 90% of the corn and soy in the United States being GM, and companies like Whole Foods saying it's going to take 5 years to have their food labeled, giving time for the companies to replace the GM food with non-GM, how long do you think it's going to take for us to source those seeds and to, if it were, pie in the sky, to replace those seeds with non-GM?
Well, this is why I think the three things that can be done right away must really be started. The first is gardens everywhere, everywhere, wherever possible, on a rooftop, in a balcony, in a backyard, in a community, in a school, in a church, wherever. The second is, I think, overcoming that mechanical separation, where we separate ourselves from nature, we separate ourselves from farmer, everything is separate, cities are separate from the land. We need to reconnect to the land. In the cities, through the gardens. But outside the cities, by deepening what was started in this country, the CSA movement. But it needs to be more creative. I think if, all of you here just decide we're going to find the farmers who will grow good, safe food for us and the different things we need. If a beautiful restaurant like this can flourish, why can't every kitchen be like this?
Exactly.
Hi. Sorry.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
Jody, did you?
Well, I just was going to ask Joanna if she would host a seed exchange so that we could all share our seeds.
Okay. I made a film called I Cure Cancer, so I know a lot about how important nutrition is for people to regain their health if they lost it, not only to get it. So obviously I'm interested in this subject. I was wondering if you could speak on the law that was just passed a few days ago here in America, stating that basically even if the government wanted to say no to Monsanto now, they couldn't. Has anybody else hear that?
It's more the court's ruling is what I gather, is it?
It's a rider.
It's a rider, but that no court can rule against Monsanto. But that is where I think something's going very wrong. Because normally, I know my friends who take these issues to court sue the government. Now the government's being sued in a court, and the government that's being sued turns around and say, we won't listen. The courts are supposed to regulate excesses of government. Yeah? So it's a constitutional crisis of a very deep kind. And I really think good constitutional lawyers, this is it. This is the problem. The GMO issue was seen as a particular concern of a very tiny group of people, as a very specialized concern. But it cuts through everybody's life, whether you are worried about health or you're an environmentalist. It doesn't matter which part of the environment you care about. It could be the pollinators, it could be the soil organisms. Our studies show 22% disappearance in 4 years of beneficial soil organisms. Animals are dying eating this stuff. So it doesn't matter which place you enter, it affects you. And the GMO question now needs to be put in its broader political context. And I think some good constitutional lawyer should be found to challenge that rider. And I'm sure in my basic sense of how a democracy works, if courts rule against governments, governments can't turn around and say, sorry, you don't matter.
Hear, hear.
Labeling law, this is something you must use. Labeling, when they say, oh, it means you're saying it's dangerous and there's no proof it's dangerous. I'm a vegetarian. I'm not saying someone eating meat will die tomorrow. But I want to know if my food is vegetarian. Choices in food are ethical, cultural choices, and that's the basic thing. The issues of safety, because they know it's not safe, that they get so panicky about it. From 2nd of October, which is Gandhi's birthday, to 16th October, which is World Food Day, we've started to organize globally intensive fortnight of actions. And these fortnights of actions focus first on getting people to realize that if there are strange laws being put in place, that I know gardens are all constantly being uprooted, they're now requiring people, they're making it look like the garden is the dangerous place, not the GMO. When I went to Hawaii, they said they were requiring them to work in moon suits. That the children had to dress up in moon suits because soil organisms are so dangerous. So every law that is not worth obeying, including patent law, people just need to say, we know what is the law of food, we know what is the law of freedom, we know what is the law of seed. But the second is all this other nonsense about feeding the world. We have so much data. And if you look out, the Seed Freedom website, sign up the Seed Freedom Declaration. And the Seed Freedom website, it's called seedfreedom.in. It has a declaration, but it always has constant updates on all these actions. So I think connecting through all of that, including the information, is vital. And those common days of action, as they'll build up, the message will go further and further. And I really feel the message now has to go from mothers to say,
we buy 85% of the food.
Yeah.
So once moms find out, it's game over. They won't have anybody to sell to.
Yes.
Yeah, I manage orange groves, and one of the things I noted is the people before me used a lot of Roundup. And bees would go to the ground, go in little circles. I don't think anyone's talked about the effects of this Roundup on the environment and also cancer with farm workers. And maybe we should be going straight after the Roundup as well and saying, this is a toxic substance that causes cancer. Doing the bees, I wonder if you could speak to that.
well, there's a very good study done by the pediatricians of Argentina on the impact of Roundup on birth defects.
Yeah.
And in this country, there's a lot of abortions and stillbirths of animals. There's a reproduction crisis in livestock. And there's a person from US government called Huber who eventually was called to do the work. And it's turning out that Roundup is killing all beneficial organisms. And there's a new fungus growing that is very toxic. And that's contaminating the corn. And then the corn is animal feed. is what is leading to this. The scientist's name is Huber, Huber. So at least these are 3 or 4 sprinkling.
We certainly go after the Roundup. If we get the Roundup banned, then their GMO seed that's Roundup ready is worthless to them.
Well, you know, on that, they're anyway realizing they have to give up Roundup because it's not working because of the super weeds.
Right.
And they're now going for Agent Orange, 2,4-D. They're now spraying Agent Orange on the farms of United States. But the creative side is where Monsanto can't deal because, when you look at it, their propaganda can only come in sets of 3 words, First it used to be food, hope, health. Now it is conservation, production, improvement of life or something like that. Sadly, creativity needs to be informed by living processes, and they're not. And I really feel if more people of the city could come in at a much higher level to not just tell the GMO story and the scandal of it, but also the alternatives. Where's the food coming from? How small farmers are more productive, how local seed is what is going to be the future because the only kind of seed that will adapt. There's so many stories to be told through music, through film, and other means.
I think we have to close.